We have to resume debate. The honourable member for Miramichi Grand Lake.
Thank you. Thank you, Madam Speaker. It's certainly a privilege today to speak on behalf of the people of Miramichi Grand Lake. Madam Speaker, this speech, in 14 years of my life in politics, this speech kept me up at night. It caused me to consider so many different angles of what is truly happening. But it took me back to some traveling I did as a young adult. I traveled extensively in Italy, France. I lived in South Korea, and for a time I stayed in Rome for 1 month. While in Rome, I studied ancient history. We learned about the Emperor Nero. We learned about how when Rome was burning in the year 64, he let the city go up in a blaze, and historians often pondered whether or not he played the fiddle while it was burning because he wanted to create a new palace amidst the ashes, and he blamed it on a small fringe minority of people called Christians. I learned that in ancient history. In the afternoon on that study trip, we studied modern Italy, and I learned about how the Italians were so thankful for Canadians for being liberated during World War II. I attended a ceremony in Tyville in Normandy in 2011, and I spoke on behalf of the province of New Brunswick, and I witnessed the tears in real time of the people that lived on Juneau, of the first houses liberated, and the respect they have for Canadians to this very day. When I lived in South Korea, Madam Speaker, I was walking down the street one night late. It was a 12-hour difference, I believe. I called home, and there was an old man. He was drunken, and he cursed me out because he didn't like the sound of my voice, because I was speaking English, and what I realized later, he thought that I was an American. Some friends of mine who were Korean walked up to the man, told him to be kind to me, and that I was Canadian. I didn't understand the language they were speaking. The old fella could barely walk. He was intoxicated. He walked up to me and kissed me on the cheek. He called me a Waguk, which is a Canadian to a South Korean, and he thanked me in his own language for what our ancestors and veterans did in the Korean conflict.
Awesome.
So it's not lost on me the respect our country has around the world and how we achieved it.
Here, here.
But the question here today, Madam Speaker, and it's an important one, we all believe in freedom. We all know how we achieved it. But we have to ascertain what it means to each and every one of us. If you're listening in Miramichi Grand Lake, and if you're watching here today, I want to tell you that there's a difference between an emergency and an invocation of the Emergencies Act. The act used to be called the War Measures Act. It was brought in World War I, World War II, and by then Prime Minister Trudeau in 1970, and what then leader of the NDP, Tommy Douglas, called basically a gargantuan oversight by an ineptitude government. So for the fourth time in our history, and now under a new name, the Emergencies Act, I need you to realize that this act was not brought in under 9/11, under Prime Minister Chrétien. It was not brought in when Alan Legier, serial killer, terrorized and horrified Miramichiers on a murdering rampage that no one will ever forget in my community. It was not brought in the natural gas, shale gas demonstrations on Route 11, which saw millions of dollars of seismic equipment destroyed, and it saw 8 police cruisers bombed with Molotov cocktails while the people that managed the protest stood there with machine guns. When the RCMP was called to make it end, it ended, and it ended abruptly. And it did not end with what we used to call the War Measures Act. It did not end with what we now call the Emergencies Act. And I will ask you something else. I'll state a fact. I'm vaccinated. My wife is vaccinated. My kids, many people I know are vaccinated. Many people I know are not vaccinated. I believe it's a personal choice to be vaccinated. And I don't believe the leader of the nation should vilify those who've made the personal choice not to. I don't believe in that. I could never believe in that. And I want to ask you something else. For those of you that are following at home, today's speech is not about vaccinations, though, and it isn't even about mandates anymore, Madam Speaker. It's about whether or not we bring the Emergencies Act in to move protesters, dissenters of the Canadian public. And I wonder about my own security, Madam Speaker. I walked through that every night for 14 days, in the dark, alone, 20 or 30 below zero, without anyone escorting me. So if this was a national crisis, who was protecting me, I must ask? The only way to find a cab was through those unlawful people, as mainstream media would have you believe. They asked me if I wanted a cheeseburger. One of them asked me if I wanted to dance. I can't make this up, Madam Speaker. You don't have to agree with the protest. You don't have to agree with why they're doing it. But you do need to see that when the bridges and rail routes and trade routes were blocked, they were moved almost instantly. How did that happen? How did all these other issues that happen on our jurisdiction get solved? They got solved by decency, Madam Speaker. They got solved by prime ministers that didn't go run and hide in their own house while their own country was in turmoil from a crisis started by the prime minister himself. My constituents, if you're wondering, I didn't run home and hide. I was one of the first members of parliament in the country to walk up to a transport and talk to some truck drivers. They were from Alberta. It was Saturday, January 29th, before the convoy even hit Parliament Hill. Most of them were vaccinated. They were protesting freedom. They believe their freedoms are being taken away. How did sitting on the back of a flatbed with a few truck drivers make me a racist, misogynist member of Parliament? How did the member from Thornhill, whose family experienced the Holocaust, get called a racist and a sympathizer? The government of Canada, Madam Speaker, has been labeling Canadians for many, many months. He's traumatized Canadians using divisive language, using constant wedge issues, resulting in the outright stigmatization of the Canadian identity. And the Prime Minister won't apologize for the labeling that he's done. He's hurled insults at everybody who disagrees with him. Madam Speaker, the Prime Minister has used the following language and expressions to further traumatize Canadian citizens. These people, unacceptable people, people who hold unacceptable views, racists, bigots, terrorists, misogynists, and people that take up space.
Unbelievable.
People that take up space, Madam Speaker? I'd like to think that all of us are allowed to take up a little bit of space in this country that we call Canada. Trudeau, the Prime Minister, Madam Speaker, must wear the blame. Madam Speaker, I want to leave you with something. We must value and uphold freedom of speech and the diversity of opinions. We all have a relative in our past who fought for the freedom we share today. They sacrificed for the right to have differing opinions from government and to live free in that perspective. Dissenting voices are part of our democracy, and I leave you with the following. I'm against the Emergencies Act because it's an overreach, freezing bank accounts. It's something they do in communist states, Madam Speaker. And I leave you with a verse from the Bible. Philippians 2, verse 3-4. Do nothing from rivalry or conceit, but in humility count others more significant than yourselves. Let each of you look not only to his own interest, but also to the interest of others. This is the Canadian way. Canada has always witnessed to the world as a nation of peace and justice. It's time we witness that again while we're here at home, Madam Speaker.
Questions and